We need to have a serious conversation about Wasians. So this past weekend, an event was hosted marketed as a Wasian meetup, with hundreds of half-white, half-Asian people coming to attend and compete in look-alike contests of numerous Wasian celebrities. On the surface, this is completely harmless and a fun idea. However, the people that started this event are part of an organization called Half Asia Spring. Half Asia Spring, in their own words on their Instagram, said that their mission is to create half Asian meetups around the United States. However, every single video posted to this account only mentions Wasians. Every single flyer only mentions Wasians. It's only marketed as a Wasian meetup. So that begs the question, why are you marketing an inclusive mixed Asian community gathering when it's centered only around white mixed Asian people?
The internet recently obsessed over a picnic where thousands of mixed-race Asians got together at Central Park, which later went on to be called the Wasian Meetup. Some called it beautiful, some called it uncomfortable, but beneath this harmless biracial meetup of connecting with the community lied many different layers and questions of race, beauty, whiteness, colonialism, and who gets to decide what is Asian identity online. And somewhere between TikTok reels, algorithmic desirability, K-pop beauty standards, the internet created a new kind of a global beauty, ideal global beauty standard. One that feels ethically ambiguous, strangely familiar, consumable, and incredibly optimized. Now, this video is not in favor or against any group. It is genuinely acknowledging the fact that mixed race people do genuinely struggle with their identity and belonging, and seeking that in different places do exist and must be exercised. But at the same time, recognizing the fact that there are larger systems that benefit off of these identities. Because the Wasian discourse isn't just about this one Wasian meetup. It opens up a plethora of topics about globalization, beauty capitalism, Asian soft power, who gets to look Asian online, and race itself when it becomes aestheticized. So me as an Indian woman watching this discourse unfold, it makes me question who actually gets to look Asian on the internet. Now, Wasian refers to someone who's white, East Asian or Southeast Asian, similar to Blasians who are Black and Asian, or Hapa. Hapa became a broader label historically used by many mixed Asian Americans. Recently, the word Wasian has been gaining its own identity. It became aesthetic. Online Wasian increasingly describes a beauty category, a type of face, and even an aspirational internet archetype. The Wasian aesthetic online often implies delicate facial harmony, lighter skin, softness, ambiguity, and what brands now call international beauty. The internet became obsessed with a face that looks Asian enough to look interesting and fascinating, and white enough to look familiar. And that is where it sets a new global beauty political standard. That sentence alone explains modern beauty politics. Beauty reflects power, colonial history, hierarchy, globalization, economics, and the internet didn't just erase these hierarchies, it modernized them. Before Wasian became mainstream internet vocabulary, many mixed Asians used the term Hapa. Hapa comes from the Hawaiian phrase Hapa haole, meaning part foreign, part white. Over time, many Asian Americans identified or adopted this label to identify themselves. And for many people, these labels can feel like they belong to a certain group. We've seen many examples of mixed race people talking about when they are going in administrative processes, when they have to check a box. What do they select? Either they are white, they're Caucasian, either they are white, they're Asian, but a mixed identity doesn't really exist. Mixed race identity can feel isolating, not too white, not too Asian, not fully belonging anywhere. So creating language around this in-between experiences became the stepping stone of the foundation of this community. But eventually, Hapa itself became a controversial term. Many Native Hawaiians criticized how this term was used out of non-indigenous contexts and how non-Hawaiians used it as generalizing in their internet identity, which can lead to cultural appropriation. And that's important because it reveals something much deeper, because even the language under mixed identity can be contested under globalization. Identity itself becomes packaged, consumable, aestheticized, and sellable and performative online. And this is where the Wasian discourse comes in, because people were not uncomfortable with a certain group of people being culturally elevated or connecting with each other, the discourse started receiving criticism because some critics argued that terms like Wasian, white passing Asian, international Asian was subtly centering on the whiteness, or subtly centering around the whiteness being the central feature of desirability. So it became white adjacent. And language matters because language reveals hierarchy over here.
Black women, I just feel like this conversation makes me kind of strikes a chord. I've never heard of the term Wasian, but to your point, this idea that all of a sudden it is trending and it's popular and it's great if you are half Asian and mixed with white. And you know, the colonialism has done a number on a lot of us to think that when you're mixed, you're better looking version of, like, when you're half black, right, you're cuter because your hair is curlier, your eyes are green. So I'm wondering, like, there's a part of me that feels like, okay, it's the representation is great, but there's a part of me is like, as a trend, so what are we doing? What are we saying in the dating world? Hey, I'm an Asian woman, I'm looking for a white man because it's trendy. Like, I just feel like there's a part of me that's like, ooh, listen, I love that Hudson Williams out there. I love that you see the representation, but there's a part of me that just feels like we should just keep an eye on this and make sure that it's not a trend. Yeah. And that those people are being seen for real people. And it's just, you know.
There's actually an interesting historical parallel here. The word trash, the term trash in America, became known where it started being identified with marginalized groups like immigrant trash, Asian trash, black trash, until later it got evolved into this phrase called white trash. And what made white trash socially loaded wasn't the term itself. It was the fact that whiteness, which was always associated with power and status, suddenly was being used as a term with degradation. The white qualifier changed the social meaning. And the same semiotic tension arises with the term Wasian. Not because the terms are equally adjacent, the white qualifier subtly changes how desirability is perceived in a social setting. And honestly, that is where the discourse stops being about just a Wasian meetup. It starts being about the proximity to whiteness. At some point, Wasian stopped being this identity online. It started becoming an archetype, where a lot of people were talking about how it's the Republic of Wasia and Keanu Reeves is the king, which starts as a meme, as an internet belonging community, which is fun because it's just vibes, and it could be a great way for you to connect with people where you have shared experiences. An imaginary nation populated by cool girls, multilingual cool girls, K-pop adjacent aesthetics, racially ambiguous beauty, globally mobile identities, and faces that the algorithms seem to love. Asian girls stopped functioning as this demographic category and turned into a globalized fantasy. Multilingual, beautiful everywhere, but not belonging anywhere. Post-national. And maybe that's why the archetype became so powerful online, because when you don't belong anywhere, fluidity becomes aspirational. The strangest things about internet culture, how it compresses an entire continent into one aesthetic or one category, because Asia starts being represented, not all of Asia. Asia, when the continent is being spoken about, it's not being represented of its entirety. It usually means Korean beauty, East Asian beauty standards, soft power, glass skin, lighter skin. Asia becoming aestheticized through soft power, and faces mostly rewarded for sitting very close to white power or whiteness. This creates what many call the globally acceptable Asian. But it's also a little problematic because Asia is a big continent, and Asia includes many other countries like Bangladesh, Nepal, Vietnam, India. But none of these countries are usually included in this globally accepted standard of Asian beauty. So we also need to talk about the exclusion that happens while you include only a certain people, but you use the broader term representing the continent. Because many critics argue that the internet often rewards East Asian beauty standards because it sits very close to Eurocentric beauty standards. And that is where the system is kinda broken. And this aesthetic sits with another uncomfortable layer of fetishization. And these aesthetics can be looked at as something that's desirable, but at the same time being fetishized. Asian women have historically been fetishized through softness, delicate beauty, light facial features, submissiveness, and exotic. Being supremely exotic and oriental. The thing that the people noticed was long before this term even came to know, long before this term was even coined, Hollywood has been typecasting Asians for the longest time, historically elevating light-skinned Asians or historically elevating Asians to certain typecast roles. Even in Asian entertainment industries, Eurasian actors are usually placed with luxury, globalized looks, and beauty standards. And the concern wasn't about mixed race people, it was about systemic visibility. Who gets seen, who gets marketed globally, and who gets to be the face of Asia online? And who gets to become the face which is synonymous with Asian beauty? Shows like To All the Boys I've Loved Before and The Summer I Turned Pretty normalized Asian female protagonists in mainstream Western media. And while many people celebrated this visibility of this kind of stories with the focus on the protagonist, which is Wasian, the critics were also looking at the fact that predominantly these stories were showing the Asian protagonist with a white love interest, always falling for a white love interest. Some critiques connected this to historical colonial narratives, at the same time in Asian fetishization and white male Asian female dynamics. It's an observation of a certain pattern, because these kind of observations, these kind of representation don't just exist in a vacuum. It happened, and the same thing you might have seen in Mindy Kaling's Never Have I Ever, where the Indian protagonist, female protagonist, fall for a white male person. As an Indian woman watching this discourse online, what fascinated me was how limited the internet's definition of Asia really is, because India is also Asia. But online, Asian beauty is always associated with K-pop aesthetics, East Asian beauty, glass skin. Meanwhile, South Asians always sit outside of this dominant group of Asian beauty. And then we have Northeast Indians, where in the northeast of India, you would always look that the people from Northeast India are Indian, but are racially always identified as someone who's Korean or Chinese or Japanese, or simply categorized as generic Asian. Usually in our own country, in India, Northeast Indians face racial profiling, face racism from our own people, and get segregated in terms of all kinds of campaigns and beauty standards and categorization. Inside India itself, Northeast Indians face racism, low visibility, or stereotyping, typecasting in Bollywood, almost being treated as a foreign person in their own country. But globally, the same features become desirable. So it's very interesting to look how beauty is defined or perceived differently as you shift continents, as you shift even regions as per se. Because beauty at the end of the day is still dependent on colonial residue and hierarchies. The model minority myth. There is another layer in the model minority myth. The idea emerged in the United States during the 1960s and suggested that Asian Americans were uniquely successful because of hard work, education, family values. On the surface, it sounds very positive, but the myth is deeply problematic. It ignores discrimination, class differences, poverty, immigration, selection effects, and it turns a hugely diverse population into a stereotype. A wealthy engineer from Bangalore, a refugee from Cambodia, a factory worker from Vietnam, a Korean business owner, a Nepali student. These lives are completely different, yet they're often grouped into one category. The myth always creates division. Instead of asking why systems produce inequality, it encourages comparisons between minority groups. It says, look at this minority. Why can't everyone else do the same? Which benefits nobody. The post-colonial theorist Homi Bhabha spoke about a concept called hybridity, the idea that mixed identities often sit in this unstable in-between places. Not fully one thing, not fully another, and honestly, the Wasian identity can be looked at as algorithmic hybridity, an identity optimized for globalization itself, culturally fluid, visually ambiguous, globally consumable. Media theorist Stuart argued that representation doesn't define reality, it actively constructs meaning. The internet isn't just showing an Asian identity, it's very consciously, globally constructing a new version of Asianness online. One shaped by algorithms, beauty capitalism, aestheticization, and maybe that's where this conversation becomes a bit uncomfortable, because underneath all these aesthetics, people are really arguing about belonging, identity, and feeling connection to their own self, feeling connection to their own people.
Yes, the Wasian meetup was weird. They excluded South Asian Wasians. They excluded Asians who were mixed with anything other than white. And they got caught saying things like, oh, Wasians are so up, we're going to take over the world, or we're going to make so many more of us. Eugenics much? But a lot of the full Asian commentary on the event has also been weird. People have been straight up calling mixed Asian and white people white supremacists, or saying that they're all a product of the Oxford study. You don't know this person, you don't know their parents. You're acting as if they can choose their parents. And even if someone's dad did fetishize their mom, what makes you think that they haven't thought about that and potentially learned and grown from that and become politically aware from that? The full Asians and mixed Asians don't need to be fighting each other. The common enemy here is white supremacy.
And both sides are responding to something really real. Mixed race people genuinely search for belonging. And people are recognizing that visibility online is still shaped by racial hierarchy.
In the Chinese American community, which I grew up in, oh, look at this family friend's mixed kid. They're so much prettier than you because their hair is lighter and their skin is lighter and their dad is white. I wish I had married a white man. Like, yes, this is something that Chinese mothers actually do tell their fully Chinese kids. Of course, that creates like an inferiority complex and jealousy. And on the Wasian kids' side, they're like, wait, I just want to be accepted. I didn't ask for this. Why are you acting as if I'm not a full person? And then we have the nerve to ask why a lot of quote Wasian unquote people lead with their mix, like I'm Irish and Chinese or whatever. Why do they talk about what they're mixed with so much? Yeah, because we talk about it so much. We never just treat them like people. Fully Asian people don't need to be jealous of someone who is part white because they are not inherently better. Like, yes, they do get treated better by like Hollywood. Out in the world, they have a little bit more white privilege. Yeah, we can't really deny it. The common enemy here is white supremacy. Asian people are not your enemy. Oh, but they're taking the roles of fully Asian people, blah, blah, blah. Well, Asian actors don't get to play Asian roles. They're always having to fit themselves into the box of someone that they're not, and then fully
Those two truths are colliding in real time on the internet. And this is where conversations around RCTA culture, Asian fishing, which is AI beauty, hyper-curated ambiguity begin appearing. RCTA 2 years ago became quite a thing online, which is race change to another, where people who feel dissatisfied with the race that they are born with decide to change their race through makeup, surgery, fillers, or any kind of medical procedures as well. One of the most visible examples was Oi London, who underwent surgeries attempting to resemble a K-pop idol. There is a movie called Slanted, which released this year, which spoke about an Asian protagonist wanting to let go of her race, wanting to evolve from her race to another where she feels validated, where she feels seen and truly herself. Slanted is a body horror movie which shows an insecure Chinese girl who is suffering through internalized racism. The title itself is controversial because slanted is an offensive term usually used as a slur for Asians. It attempts to satirize American dream and also talking about Eurocentric beauty standards. And that is why RCTA isn't the beginning of the problem. It is the setting stone. It is the setting stage for globalized beauty or globalization and beauty standards. That's why RCTA culture isn't the beginning of the problem. It's the final stage of beauty globalization and algorithmic identity culture. Because when beauty becomes aestheticized, consumable, identified online, globally rewarded, it starts becoming an identity as people start wearing them. But underneath all of this beauty capitalism, mixed aesthetics, algorithms, curated identity, there's also a lot of loneliness. There's also a lot of people seeking a kind of belonging, seeking where they belong, seeking a community, because as humans, we are social beings and we want to feel connected to something. We want to feel connected to a group. Social media increasingly rewards visual consumability, aesthetic performance, marketable identity, but never necessarily humanity. People become brands, archetypes, fantasy projections before even they are considered as an individual person or a human as per se. And that's why so many people online are feeling so disconnected, because we are increasingly rewarded for becoming the visually understandable version of ourselves, not fully human. Maybe the internet didn't create a post-racial world. Maybe it created this aestheticized version of racial hierarchy. And maybe that's why the Asian discourse is so emotionally charged. Because underneath the aesthetics, people really are looking for belonging, power, proximity to visibility. Who gets seen as modern? Who gets seen as beautiful? Who gets seen as globally desirable? Internet didn't just create a beauty trend. It created a globally aestheticized, ideal, optimized beauty face. It created a globally optimized face. Perhaps what makes the Wasian debate so fascinating is that it reveals how different identity has become in the internet age. A century ago, most people inherited identity from where they lived, the language they spoke, and the communities around them. Today, identity is increasingly negotiated in public. On social media, millions of strangers participate in deciding who belongs, who represents a culture, and who gets to speak for it. So when people argue about whether a Wasian creator is really Wasian, they really are often arguing about something much bigger: representation, visibility, beauty standards, cultural ownership, and sometimes their own fears of being overlooked. The reality is that Asia has never been a single thing. It is home to billions of people, hundreds of ethnicities, and thousands of ways of being. A mixed-race people can have a genuine connection to Asia. A South Asian can feel excluded from popular ideas of Asianness. An East Asian can feel protective of a culture that has historically been stereotyped or misunderstood. All of these experiences can exist at the same time. Perhaps that is what the internet struggles with most, not difference, but complexity. Because complexity rarely goes viral. Simple categories do. But human beings have never fit neatly into categories. And maybe the goal isn't to arrive at a final destination of who is Asian enough. Maybe it's to recognize that identity is often more complicated than the labels we build around it.